Have you ever thought about how everything from the vastness of space to the tiniest cells in our bodies seem to kind of work in strangely similar ways? For example, the ways galaxies spiral out into infinity feels eerily like watching molecules dance around in an atom. When you zoom in far enough, or zoom out far enough, it's almost like reality starts to rhyme with itself. There's a famous video that I absolutely feel was groundbreaking back in 1977, done by Charles and Ray Ames for IBM, called The Powers of 10, where they zoom out from a picnic blanket to the edge of the known universe in powers of 10, and then zoom all the way in down to the atomic level inside the body. And things like the Fibonacci sequence or the golden ratio, otherwise known, within sacred geometry, make it hard to shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, everything is connected. And if you're into simulation theory, well, this is where it starts to sound a bit like a glitch in the system. Now, all of this is basically to say that this brings me to one of my favorite subgenres of science fiction, which is something called BioPunk. Forget starships and laser battles. This is the microscopic world that takes place inside of us. It's about how the smallest things, from cells, bacteria, to even viruses, they have their own rules, their own strange behaviors, and might just be hiding the secrets of life itself. Now, one of my favorite examples of biopunk literature is Greg Bear's short story, Blood Music. Blood Music is a story that follows Virgil Ulam, a rogue scientist who develops intelligent, sentient, self-aware biological cells called noocytes. After being fired for unethical experimentation, he injects himself with the noocytes to avoid destroying them. And these cells begin to rapidly replicate and enhance his body, granting him physical and mental changes that on the surface seemingly improve significantly his performance, his age, but they're also spreading unknowingly to others through contact. And as the noocytes evolve, they transform the infected into a collective intelligence, merging consciousness and devolving individual identities. Eventually, the microscopic noocytes reshape the entire planet into a unified, post-human entity, leaving behind traditional notions of life and individuality. By the end of the story, the microscopic world has completely taken over the macroscopic one. And Greg Bear leaves us with this haunting line at the end of the story. How many times has this happened elsewhere? Travelers never came through space to visit the Earth. They had no need. They had found universes in grains of sand. The author is basically highlighting that while we usually think of infinity as something that stretches out beyond our galaxy into the unknown in every direction, it also shrinks infinitely into the forever divisible elements of matter itself. And that idea, that entire universes exist inside the tiniest of things, completely captivates me. And so it got me thinking about the lore in Warhammer, actually, and particularly the orcs. Now, if you know your Warhammer lore, and specifically 40k lore, you probably already know that orcs aren't born the usual way. They grow. Orcs start out as fungal spores, sprouting out of the ground, slowly developing into squigs, grots, and eventually the full-blown green lunatics we all know and love. But what if we took that idea and turned it inward? What if we imagined a world where the orcs weren't stomping across a planet, but instead were growing and thriving on the surface of a living creature? A microscopic ecosystem, an entire orky society on the skin of some great unknowable being. And that brings us to the world of Cutania. The name comes from the word cutaneous, meaning related to the skin. It's a place where the orcs, or in this case, I've borrowed from Age of Sigmar, the Orruks, live out their brutal, fungal lives on the surface of a creature's flesh. The land twitches and sweats, covered in forests of hair follicles, mountains of scar tissue, and rivers of glistening pus. It's grotesque, yeah, but it's also alive, teeming with possibility and life. And here in this living world, we find real-life wonders like the actual tardigrades, mysterious ancient creatures that have defied extinction. These indestructible beasts thrive in the harshest environments. In the real world that we know, at just 0.5 millimeter in size, they can be found at the bottom of oceans as well as the vacuum of outer space, indoor temperatures from negative 272 degrees centigrade to 150 degrees centigrade. They can go without food and water for over 30 years and have been around for something like 530 million years. So they're a perfect candidate for a creature that can form almost a backbone for the Orruks in the world of Cutania, becoming the perfect mounts and allies for what the Orruks aim to do. Welcome to the American sprawl of the Valley of Sores, a living, breathing battlefield. Here the Orruks divide themselves into hunting parties, each one marked by fluorescent biomarkers that represent their goals, their enemies, and their resources. At the head of this brutal confederation is Warlord Epidermok, a towering figure draped in skins, horns, and talismans. His body glows with a tricolor blend of fluorescent biomarkers representing the hunting parties that he leads: cyan, magenta, and green. These biomarkers are sacred to the sprawl, signaling the locations of resources and the targets of war. The first of these hunting parties is the Bloom Guard, covered with a cyan biomarker. They are tasked with seeking out the precious fungal spores that grow in the sweat swamps of Cutania. Led by their hulking tardigrade mount, its thick, resilient hide streaked with cyan, the Bloom Guard are a mix of Orruks and Grots, brutish yet cunning, armed with scavenged weapons forged from the detritus of their living world. The terrain behind them is a towering cluster of fungal spores, their glowing nodules pulsing faintly like veins beneath translucent skin. For the Bloom Guard, these spores are not just resources, they are life itself. Next, we have the Sorebound, a magenta biomarked warband tasked with harvesting the pus from open sores of the valley. Their territory is a grotesque sprawl of ruptured flesh, where jagged hair follicles tower like splintered trees. The Sorebound's tardigrade companion is a massive lumbering beast, its magenta-streaked hide bristling with scars and nodules. Orruks and Grots alike toil at its side, siphoning pus from the land as they fend off rival warbands and the living parasites that call this place home. Finally, there are the Lumivores, glowing with green biomarkers. This hunting party specializes in chasing down the strange, fluorescent creatures that scuttle across the flesh of Cutania. These small organisms, glowing and impossibly fast, emit a phosphorescent light that the Lumivores prize. They are constantly chasing these writhing clusters of green organisms that try to escape their grasp. Even their tardigrade mount, streaked in green, seems a bit more agile than its brethren, lurching forward as the Lumivores sprint across the skin plains in pursuit of their glowing prey. But here's the real kicker. The American sprawl is just one tiny part of Cutania. As the Orruks bicker, fight, and harvest, they are completely unaware of the greater world they're a part of. If you zoom out, you'll see the muscles twitching beneath their feet. Rivers of sweat carve their way across endless plains. The whole world shifts and moves as if it's alive. Because, well, it is. And that brings us back to blood music. Are the Orruks of Cutania a threat that could consume their entire world? Or are they just an insignificant blip on the radar of a far greater creature's life? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Whether we're talking about universes in grains of sand or entire armies in the folds of a creature's skin, there's always more to see when you look closer. And that's the magic of kitbashing and world building and telling stories. It's about finding those little universes and bringing them to life. So there you have it, the beginnings of the American sprawl in the Valley of Sores. Let me know in the comments how you'd build out your own microcosmic world. Where would you locate it? What kind of surface would it be on and why? What happens when you zoom in and then zoom out? And as always, keep building, keep imagining, and remember, everything, no matter how small, has a story to tell. If you're interested in staying more closely connected to White Flag's activities, please consider joining our Patreon. The free tier of membership gives you access to a community of like-minded kitbashers, world builders, and storytellers and painters. And you'll see work in progress as White Flag continues to develop the various worlds it has created. The paid tier members also get access to a new set of videos that are for members only called Portraits on Patreon. And this is where I actually feature artists and creators that have inspired me in my own work and have led to a lot of the ideas that you see in these videos. The first one is already up on Patreon for paid members, and it's a profile of Chris Cooksey, the really incredible sculptor and mixed media artist that I have been following for quite a long time. There'll be at least 1 to 2 Portraits on Patreon videos for paid members published every month. So if that's something that sounds of interest to you, please consider joining a paid tier membership. You can find the link to the Patreon in the description below. And I want to give a special thank you to the existing both free and paid tier of members on Patreons. Your support and contributions to the community really help to keep this channel going. Thanks for watching.